Fear. Who's ever not done something because they were afraid of it? The rest of you are lying. Fear is one of our biggest blocks. We also have an inner critic. Who's aware that they have an inner critic? Yeah, they talk to you. And don't we play their loop in our head and talk ourselves out of doing things because our inner critic tells us we can't? Guess what we're going to do now? What I want you to do is actually just write down what your inner critic says to you. I'll give you an example because I had to do this exercise, but I just want you to free flow, whether it's about a speech or a job or some particular aspect in your life, just write out what your inner critic is saying. In my case, my pen ran out, which I thought was ironic, but I kept scribbling. I just can't read it. But what happened with my inner critic, and this was about stand-up comedy, said, you couldn't write comedy punchlines if your life depended on it. You were just lucky on your first night. They were a good audience. They wanted to laugh. You weren't that good. You always do a blinder first session of everything and then fail. So quit while you're ahead. Anyway, it went on. I just scribbled onto the page. What I want you to do is just uncensored write down everything that inner critic is saying to you. Okay? Just go, write. Be free. Let it out. Write what your inner critic is saying. As quickly as you can. Just let it flow.
Belinda, we're not talking about voices we can hear, right?
In your case, Phil, no. I don't want to know what they're saying. Don't think about it, just let it get into that zone. It's easy. If you can't get going, think of a specific thing that you've not done or you're putting off doing because you don't believe you can, and just write it down. Write down what's going on. Write down what's being said. Okay, does anyone want to come and share what their inner critic said? You don't have to.
I've got a reputation,
Okay, that's okay, as I said, you don't have to. But is there anyone who's surprised by what came out when they just let themselves write? What their inner critic was saying? Anyone surprised? No? You're all easy. I was very surprised by what came out once I started to write what my inner critic was saying. No one wants to come and share? That's okay.
I will if you want.
Excellent. Why don't you come? Yay, big hand for Joseph.
Why not?
Hey?
Why not?
Why not? I did. It's not that that's a good reason to do it.
You're telling me. My inner critic. Just because it's a good idea, it's just another good idea of yours. You keep coming up with these good ideas, but then you don't do them. Probably because you're lazy and complacent, and you're comfortable. I'm comfortable doing what I'm currently doing. So who needs the hassle? And I stopped there with my pen almost straight out.
Oh, well, so I just kept writing.
Yeah, no.
Now, can I ask you something? Do you know whose voice that is? No, it's an honest question. For example, when I wrote mine down,
Yeah.
That's my brother. When I read it out, I went, oh yeah, that's my brother.
Sorry.
Do you know?
Because I have many, it's like Phil by the sounds of it.
Where do we get these people from?
It's a Rockdale area.
Okay, no, so does that person...
Oh no, definitely
is that someone
me.
you know? Okay, so that's you.
That's me.
It's not the voice of your mother or your father? Okay.
No. They don't talk to me. Thank you.
So, one thing that I want you to know, want you to consider now as you look back over this, you've got some idea what your inner critic says now. Is it fair or not fair? Not fair. Most of us will realise what our inner critic says is not very fair. But have you ever thought about it or evaluated it before? Have you ever written it down and looked at what you're actually playing on loop? and said, oh, you know, is some of this fair? Is it not fair? Think about it, take it away and look at it, because, and well, continue, because we're going to talk about it in a minute anyway. Whose voice is it? Often, most of us, when we read, and this is why, when you go home, read your inner critic out to yourself. Because when you read it out, it often becomes really obvious, the relationship that you have with your inner critic. And as I said, there are a lot of us that it's a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle. It's someone often that we've known in our life. And as soon as you read out those words, you go, oh my God, that's in my case, my brother.
Doesn't it keep repeating itself? Become boring.
Sometimes.
It gains momentum.
It gains momentum, it does. And that's what we're going to talk about. Because you've written down what your inner critic says, right? Is it fair, not fair? It's not fair. Whose voice is it? What you need to do to manage your inner critic is actually build a relationship with it. What do most of us do about that voice or that critic? Try to pretend it doesn't exist. Does that help? It doesn't help at all. What we actually need to do is become friends with our inner critic. We actually need to learn to embrace and accept our inner critic. Stop trying to actually just pretend it doesn't exist and put it aside, but embrace it. Write it down, come up with the voice, see whose relationship it is, and talk to it. Reassure your inner critic that it's going to be okay. Yes, I know I'm a one-hit wonder and the first time I do everything is just amazing and then I fall flat, but you know what? It's okay. What I'll do is I'll just put more effort in this time. It'll all be all right. Stroke of the inner critic. If you know what your inner critic is saying, become friends with it. Build a relationship with it. There will be things in there that are things that are your own fears that you can pacify by working on them. Some things that you will have written on that paper are triggers for you to go and work on aspects of you because they're your fear. You've got to start to understand your inner critic, not just pretend it doesn't exist. Listen to what your inner critic is saying and evaluate. Some things will just be completely unfair and silly, and you can just thank your critic for that, thanks, but don't necessarily need to worry about that. Other things you can actually look at and go, you know what? This is actually telling me I'm afraid that I haven't prepared well enough when I do this. Or this is telling me that I'm actually afraid I don't know enough about this. And so your way of dealing with your inner critic then is to actually say, look, you know what, it's okay. I'm going to go and work harder at this aspect. I'm going to go and find that answer out. I'm going to go and work on that. So instead of actually just pretending it doesn't exist, and pretending that voice isn't there, start to use it as a tool to your own advantage. Start to tap into things that are your own fears that your inner critic is telling you and go and work on them. Use it two ways. One, to have a laugh at your inner critic for being such a silly idiot, because we know they are. What would they know? Build that relationship and start to actually go, it's okay. Instead of pretending it isn't there and feeling afraid, start to talk to it and become friends with it and leverage what is in there as your fears that you can then go and work on to overcome. So instead of pretending they don't exist, actually saying, you know what, this is me saying, I'm afraid I haven't done enough of that, I haven't looked at this well enough, I need to go and work on these. Go and act upon any of those things that are your own fear motivation that you've not done enough to address. Does that make sense? Overwhelming silence. Okay, you know, unless you say some response here, you're just going to have to listen to me repeat this over and over again until you respond. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. Phew. Now, is it helpful?
Yes.
Can you see how that might change how you react to doing different tasks that you're afraid of doing?
Yes.
And how you can actually use that critical loop that you play to your own advantage? Okay, phew. That's good. That's the only way I know that will effectively deal with an inner critic. Write it down. If there's a time that you're feeling blocked, that you're scared of, that you know you're running that voice, madly write it down. Read it out and say, oh, that's my mum. It's okay, mum. It's all going to be okay. The things that are unfair, say, you know, it's okay, I know you're afraid of that, but we don't have to worry because actually it's not real. And then look at anything that is your little trigger that you can act on to minimise that fear, that you can take advantage of to be better. That way, when you're friendly with your inner critic, instead of trying to pretend it doesn't exist, instead of creating your own elephant in the room, you can actually use it to your own advantage. Use it to help you get ahead, embrace it, use it, leverage it to get your best results.